progressive organizations, conservative organizations, diversity organizations, all sorts of different groups. And now everyone's basically going back to their boards of directors and asking that now the proposal's final, who's going to be there. We have good government groups that are standing with us. There are several counties that have endorsed it, cities. We have several thousand California volunteers right now. And then we have some minority groups, but it's really not fair to say that in California anymore because minorities are a majority. Anyway, those are sort of the coalition members. But it's a coalition of the disaffected. It's a coalition of the people who aren't happy with the way things are going. That's the coalition we have. We've had pledges of about $3 million that we've raised right now, and we need to get a lot more. To get onto the ballot, we're going to need at least 4 and maybe more than that. And we propose to collect it through grassroots fundraising, and then also through wealthy, civically minded individuals in California. And a lot of them have been stepping up to help.
Eric? Okay, I'm Eric Pine. I'm a student at the Goldman School and a member of the Berkeley Common Cause. Dean Brady stole my question, so I'm going to have to give another one. So, what's the difference between this Constitutional Convention and just an initiative you make up? And why do we need to formalize it to authorize 400 people to get together to make another initiative? When do we just do that already?
Well, I think John already said it, which is that initiatives are limited to particular topics, and there are legal restrictions on how far afield they can go. It really actually is a fairly complicated area of law. But basically speaking, you can't do too much with one initiative, and each initiative does cost a lot of money to get through. So the virtues of the Constitutional Convention is that you can consider a lot of things at once and maybe do some trade-offs and get a package that gets people happy, whereas a particular initiative might not make some people happy, and therefore there might be enough people to vote it down.
So I guess the follow-up is then, what authorizes us to do this? And then, you already asked this question, but would it be abused in the future if we put it out there like the recall, where people would just be able to call a Constitutional Convention every 10 years just because they wanted to? Or is it, so sacred that we would do that?
Well, some states actually have requirements that there be at least thought about a constitutional convention every 10 years, 20 years, whatever. We don't have that in California, so we need something like the initiative process here, which says let's invoke the mechanism in the state constitution that will allow us to call a constitutional convention.
But I think
that's what's going on here.
What we're missing in the conversation is under existing law, only the legislature can call a constitutional convention and must do so by a 2/3 vote.
Okay.
That's the underlying
So we're authorizing
issue.
the electorate to do it after this?
Right. This is an amendment to that article, which is Article 18 that Ms. Hilda spoke about, that would allow the people to directly call a constitutional convention. Although they're only allowed to do it once every 10 years. They can do it every 11, they can do it 11, 12, 13, but they can't do it more than one time every 10 years.
Thank you.
My name is Brad Flay-Hardy. I'm active with Healthcare for All and Marine Peace and Justice Coalition, but I am a conceptual artist, so I'm here to be the lunatic fringe to push John more to the center, because I pick apart statements like what Dean Brady said was, he started his presentation with the way budget works, the way budgets work, and explained that with statistics, but the reality is budgets aren't working on any level at all. They aren't working governmentally, they aren't working corporately, they aren't working individually, and so now we have to reevaluate the concepts behind our words, and what seems to me is why budgets don't work is because money became a monarch that we have to overthrow as a revolution with 3 branches of economy. And profits work great for production, they work great for the Industrial Revolution, but now we have to give credit to education. Instead of people coming out of school with debts, they should come out of school with credit. So the question boils down to, if we have a deficit that we're supposed to pay in the future, how can we turn it to a credit that can be applied for the future? It's an exact number. It's been scientifically produced. There's statistics that prove it exists. Why can't we conceptually make it something that gives us power instead of something that takes it away?
Well, I think you're calling for a different kind of accounting system, which some economists do talk about, how that often when we put together national accounts, for example, we don't measure certain kinds of things that are important, like we don't take into account how much environmental degradation a particular project creates. We don't take into account how investment in certain areas creates long-term benefits. We don't take into account housework often in national accounts. So that I don't think you want to get away completely from the notion of measuring things and having something that, let us say, ultimately will look like money. You just want to measure things in a somewhat different way. And there are people who have been talking about that. There was just a report, I think it was Amartya Sen and was it Joe Stiglitz, I think, had some report where they talked about how internationally we should have different measures of welfare that take into account some of the things I just described. So there are sort of folks talking about some of these things. I don't know how that immediately can help solve the California budget crisis, however. I mean, unfortunately, we are stuck with the fact that we have to have a balanced budget, and that's just the way it is. There is some report, however, that Mike Genest at one point looked into thinking about California as a federal territory or something. I just saw something on it. It sounds crazy, and that therefore then we could somehow print money or something. I don't know.
We could run a deficit.
Mike Genest is the head of the Department of Finance. I saw that on a webpage today, so I know it must be true.
Thanks very much. Let's move to this side of the room.
Yes, I'm Dan Rink. Having been through the Mario Savio era here at Cal, as well as constitutional reform issues brought up at the federal level, Committee on the Constitutional System, Douglas Dillon and Lloyd Cutler. We run into all of these are the same issues that were argued out time and time again. And my concern is that we do these institutional reform movements as a one-time take it or leave it, as we have just done the medical reform issue. And I'm concerned that this is going to be one of those in addition. It will be low-key, there'll be 400 people involved internally, and then it will be sprung on most people who won't have paid any attention to it. And if it indeed passes, we will be prohibited from changing it again for another 10 years. That would be my concern. So the question is, how do we have, probably it's going to take a decade of institutional reform to get it right. How do we design a decade of institutional reform with checks and balances built in, deliberation built in, far beyond the group of 400? I think that's what we need, and is that in a provision?
Well, let me just say something. That Canada a few years ago was thinking about changing some of its rules for electoral politics and created a series of people's assemblies where they took more or less random groups of people, got them together, brought experts together with them, and then had a lot of media attention to what was going on. And it seems to me one of the things that could complement this kind of constitutional convention would be those kinds of people's assemblies that would help manufacture, if you will, news events, but maybe news events with some real substance where people were discussing these issues. Because part of the problem we suffer from in this state is that we have a media in the state that doesn't cover state politics very much. The last I looked, there was not a single television station in Sacramento except the Sacramento television stations that had reporters there. There are some print reporters in Sacramento, but we just really don't cover the state very much, so we don't know much about what's going on.
I think the convention actually is going to be covered pretty well. If you think about, I've done, it's not about me, but we've been in stories on the front of the Guardian in London, the front page of Le Monde in France, did an interview on Al Jazeera, which was crazy, but wonderful, and CNN. So I think this is going to be another one of those California stories. We'll see. Like the recall, which, we were all paying attention to the recall because it just was so California. And so I think that the convention has the opportunity to be like that as well. You asked a question also about